Well, thank you, Nicole, and thanks everybody for being here. So I'm Andy Behar. I am the CEO of As You Sow. We're a 501c3 nonprofit. We've been around for 30 years, and we focus on corporate accountability. So we do a great deal of interaction with major corporations. We engage the corporations by doing research, sitting down with them, writing them letters, sitting down and having conversations with them. Last year, we had conversations with 222 companies, engagements, and 130 of them listened to what we had to say. They took our research in and they said, this is great. Let's go get to work because this is going to reduce the risk of the material risk of all of the stakeholders. And that's what we like. That's the best way to go. But 92 of them said, I don't think so, not right now. And so we escalated by filing a shareholder resolution, which is a 500-word document filed 6 months before the annual meeting. And then that is the frame by which all shareholders get to vote on that resolution. So the voting that happens at the annual meeting of each company is what we're talking about today. Because when we get a lot of people voting for it, when we sit down with the company after the meeting, it's a different conversation than if we only get a few to vote. Now, it's not the end all. All of these votes are non-binding, with the exception of when you're voting for the boards of directors. So the resolutions, again, even if you get a majority vote, the company doesn't have to do it. But if they don't, and then they don't take any action, what happens is then they're much more vulnerable. You can run a board slate. You can say the board has breached their fiduciary duty. We want to replace the board the next year, or you can escalate into other things. We also escalate into sometimes litigation with companies. We're running 7 what are called derivative actions right now, where we represent the company and sue the board. So it's all part of a path, but really what it comes down to is engaging the companies, doing the research, and trying to get them to shift their policies and practices to reduce risk. So the vote. There's a lot of ways to vote. Endowments have, and these are all for equities. So in the case of Warren Wilson, we've been working with them for many years on this and working with Benjamin. They have about 1,600 equities. They have a lot of different companies that they're going to be voting on, a lot of different things, including the boards of directors, the auditor, whether they approve the CEO pay package, and then all the shareholder resolutions. So it's a lot of decisions to be making on that many companies, and most endowments have at least that many, some even more. So generally what institutional investors do is subscribe to a set of guidelines. Now there's 2 big companies, ISS, Institutional Shareholder Services, and Glass Lewis are the 2 biggest. ISS is probably 75% of the market. And you can subscribe to one of their voting platforms. So for instance, you could say, I want to just vote with management all the time, or I want to vote in an ESG aligned way, or I want to vote in a sustainable way. There's a bunch of different ways. If you're a union, you might vote in a Taft-Hartley way. You might be required by law to do that. Glass Lewis has similar. So As You Sow has always been developing our own set of guidelines. We believe that they should be very ESG aligned. And so we took our guidelines that we published every year, just as on paper, this is how we believe one should vote, and turned it into a system that we call As You Vote. I'm going to share a screen and take you through some slides, and hopefully Zoom cooperates. It's been pretty good today, but sometimes it doesn't. Can you see a screen that says vote your values? Everyone see that? Okay, I'm going to make this larger. So As You Vote is, as it says, it's an ESG values aligned proxy voting service. Now, this sits on what's called the Broadridge Proxy Edge platform. So between a corporate secretary and the custodian lies Broadridge. It's a database that has all the control numbers. So they know all of the stocks that you own in your portfolio are all registered within Broadridge. And so essentially, we just want to simplify how you can vote in an ESG aligned way. And we do this by creating this basically a rules-based engine. So Broadridge is the biggest database of proxy voting. ISS votes through Broadridge. Glass Lewis votes through Broadridge. As you sow and as you vote, sit right on this Proxy Edge voting platform. And we work with Intentional Endowment Network as one of our partners. So as well as Confluence Philanthropy. In fact, the funds that come from this, we have a split where Intentional Endowment Network and Confluence, we give them a grant for their activities, for educating people about sustainable investing. So why your proxy vote matters, it's because it's part of this whole engagement, that you have this impact on corporate decision making. And if you can change a corporation's decisions, then on climate change, on racial justice, it ripples through their supply chain, all their customers, their employees, has a real big influence on the world. It really does change things. So it's a rules-based engine, which means that we have a rule. So for instance, if a CEO pay package is greater than 100 times the median worker, that we vote against that pay package, and we also vote against the compensation committee. Last year, we voted against 357 companies in the S&P 500 on their say on pay package. Now that's more than half, but we believe that CEOs are really egregiously overpaid, and so we set that up in that way. It's a rule. If a company has less than 50% women on the board, we vote against the nominating committee, and we vote against people on the board because of that. We want to encourage companies to have greater gender diversity. So those are some of the rules. So, but it's also customized. So let's say Apple puts out their proxy statement, comes into the Broadridge system. We immediately, instantly, it's automatic. We fill out that ballot. Everything is all filled out. Now, if you're one of our subscribers, you can go in and you can say, you're voting against that director, but I really like that person, and you can switch that vote. So you could customize it entirely, and then you hit submit, and that is what gets submitted. So fully customizable, and also you get a report back of exactly how you voted. And you can get those on a weekly or monthly basis. So again, every proxy statement is filled out, it's customizable, and then you get a report. We're much less expensive than ISS, SRI, or Glass Lewis ESG. We charge $15 a meeting. The minimum is $1,500, so 100 meetings, and then the profits or this money. Broadridge keeps $5. They send As You Sow $10. We keep half of it for our advocacy work, and then we split the other half. Half goes to IEN and half goes to Confluence, again, for education. So not only do you get ESG aligned voting, but you also get advocacy and education all in one for a much, much smaller fee than what ISS or Glass Lewis would be charging. The rest of these slides are really, why would you trust As You Sow to set up these guidelines? Well, we have 30 years of ESG experience. We're the leading shareholder advocacy group. We file more resolutions than anybody else. I believe, other than governance, we're the number 1 group. Again, we filed 92 last year. I guess we should update this with the 2022 numbers. This year, like I mentioned, we had 222, we had 92, and we had 7 majority votes and a 41% average vote. So this slide is really just about how shareholder advocacy is growing year on year, and that we have more and more majority votes. I should add, in the 2022, which there were 34 total votes across the whole range. We've had a lot of majority votes. We had a 98% vote at GE this year. We had a 98% vote at Caterpillar and a 92% vote at Boeing. And so signing up is easy. You go to this site, the As You Vote site, and you'd fill out this little form, you hit submit, and what happens is it goes to Broadridge, and then the folks at Broadridge call you up and they sign you up. So that's the real broad strokes on proxy voting. So I'm going to pause there.
And I'll hand it over to Daniel too to share some of his work and how proxy voting has influenced some of his wins in the 2022 season.
Yeah, more than happy to. Thanks, Nicole. Thanks, Jalen and Andy, previously. So yeah, I guess I can speak a little bit to one of our kind of resounding wins in the last season that was enabled by our collaboration and work with the Warren Wilson College Endowment. And it gets to also just how much influence and leverage we can have as investors and how much our potential vote in support of ESG, and in this case, climate-related asks and resolutions can influence large companies. So I've been working and engaging with Duke Energy, largest power and gas utility in the United States, for the last 4 to 5 years. In the last few years, we've shifted from their power generation business to having appropriate climate reduction targets for its gas business. So the gas that it sells to customers to use for heating in their homes and for businesses, which currently has had no climate-related reduction targets and transition plans covering them across all utilities in the US, essentially. We had been engaging with the company for 2 years. We wrote up a resolution because we were unhappy with their lack of progress. I should also mention that I'm part of the CA 100 Plus working group for Duke Energy, which accounts for over 60 trillion in assets under management at the moment. So there's a lot of large institutional investors there that I work with to kind of educate on these topics, bring them with us to vote in concert on the resolutions that we bring to bear at these companies. And once that resolution was filed, Duke and their team came to me and they asked for a withdrawal in order for it to not end up on their proxy, and agreed to expand their net zero target to cover all of their scope 3 emissions, which includes all the emissions from their natural gas business, the purchased power that they get from the grid, and also the upstream emissions from the fossil fuels, coal and natural gas, that they procure for their gas business and for the generation business. So that means that their targets now have moved to encompass 40% of emissions that were not previously covered. So huge shift in emissions. We also had a huge withdrawal and win with Dominion Energy, the 8th largest utility, 2 weeks after that, and we are anticipating bringing 4 to 5 more engagements of that type to other large utilities around the US. So kind of just helps encapsulate what sort of a large impact we can have on climate-related topics. Thanks, and I'll pass it back to Nicole.
Thank you, Daniel. And please do keep any questions in mind, whether it's about proxy voting as you vote or just interest in learning more about the work that Jalen, Daniel, and others are doing on broadly the engagement space. Those are very welcome as well. And I would love to hear from Ben as well. We've mentioned Warren Wilson College's engagement work and partnership with As You Sow a few times. They are both doing some great filing and co-filing work, as well as proxy voting work through As You Vote. So Ben, it would be wonderful if you could speak to the As You Vote experience and what that has looked like from your viewpoint.
Yeah, totally. Thanks for having me, and thanks for all the great insights. And so, yeah, as has been mentioned, my work on the Warren Wilson College ESG Advisory Committee, which has a partnership with As You Vote. And through that partnership, we learned about the As You Vote platform put on by As You Sow and Broadridge. So a bit of context. So from the endowment perspective, we started working on ESG back in 2015 and didn't really know what we were doing, what issues even to focus on. And we're really struggling to educate ourselves while trying to enact the values of the college endowment. So we had a lot of learning to do, like, what is a resolution? What is proxy voting? We were starting from square one. I think we all know what a shareholder resolution is at this point. And which goes into a proxy vote. And so we learned it's just this gargantuan task of, each year companies have dozens or usually a dozen potential resolutions, shareholder resolutions that could be voted on at their AGM. So that was a really an unworkable task for our small ESG committee of volunteers trying to implement this at a college endowment. So when we first heard about this As You Vote platform, we were very excited to learn how to put it on autopilot, essentially. So we signed up, we worked with Broadridge to implement it. And so now I have access to this dashboard where we can see all the upcoming annual general meetings, the votes that will be up at those meetings, and the recommendations from As You Sow, as Andy laid out earlier. So from my end, I don't have to do anything, and it's totally on autopilot. I can go in and change the votes as I want to, if needed. If there's a company we want to focus on, an issue we want to focus on, we can go in and make those changes, but we don't have to. So this was fantastic. And so in the year that we've been implementing this, so we started this like last January, so maybe a year and a half now. The As You Vote platform has voted about 13,000 proxies for us, which is tremendous. We would not have had the capacity to do all that research and know how to vote all those issues. So 13,000 proxy votes were cast at about 1,200 companies. And we had some big wins. As I mentioned earlier, we voted on the General Electric proposal, proposals at American Express and Union Pacific as well. So it's just been a great implementation and use case that I think could really scale at other universities. So happy to answer more questions about how it worked at Warren Wilson or any other work we're doing as well. But that's been our experience.
Thank you so much, Ben. And lastly, before we get to any questions, I would love to hear from Nico, who has a very unique perspective as a former student that is now also working in the investment office at Arizona State University, who put a huge amount of time and effort into developing proxy voting guidelines for the institution before they signed up for As You Vote. So I would love to hear what the experience with As You Vote has been from your perspective, Nico, and how the implementation of those proxy voting guidelines through As You Vote has been going so far.
Yeah, so I think it's helpful to kind of discuss how we got started on our proxy voting journey at ASU, which began about 2 years ago when 20 students from 5 different schools within the university came together to draft proxy voting guidelines for the ASU endowment. And this resulted in a 36-page document that covered 8 sustainability topics. And it did a really great job of laying out what our values are here at ASU. But it was not designed in a way that was very easy to implement, which makes sense because prior to working on drafting proxy voting guidelines, the majority of these students had never heard of shareholder resolutions, nevertheless written one or voted on one before. So at the beginning of this school year, when we were discussing how can we start implementing our proxy voting guidelines for our directly held shares, we were presented with the As You Vote proxy voting service, and we thought this would be a kind of perfect solution to our problem, where we could supplement our student drafted proxy voting guidelines with As You Sow's proxy voting guidelines that are more comprehensive and certainly much easier to implement due to how they are written. And so it was a good fit for us because As You Sow's obviously an expert in this field, so very well-researched guidelines. Also, we are confident with their values so that they are very aligned with our own values, so that if our guidelines do not explicitly address how to vote on a specific resolution, we're comfortable defaulting to them, as well as if we simply don't have the capacity to research every resolution and every vote individually to look at our proxy voting guidelines, we are very comfortable going with As You Sow's recommendation on this. And then the partnership with Broadridge made it really easy for us to get set up with a technology solution platform that would enable us to just electronically be casting our proxy votes. So that partnership worked really well to just simplify and streamline everything while providing this supplemental resource that really made it possible for us to begin this journey. And so this summer, the ASU Endowment, for the first time was casting its proxy votes for its directly held shares. And I would say this was only made possible because we had the As You Vote service supporting us, because it starts and it comes very quickly with just the sheer volume of votes that you have to cast. And so it was really nice to be able to just prioritize the ones that, you know, perhaps we had engaged or had a closer relationship with that company where we wanted to look into it more, and then default to As You Vote for the vast majority of things like directors, where we just did not have the capacity or the expertise to do a thorough job of researching each individual vote. And so now this year, for the first time, ASU has voted its proxies directly and in a way that we believe is very aligned with our values. And so it's been a great experience for all of us, and just really helped us get kind of a win that will continue to build support from our administration and the different committees for which we seek approval from whenever we want to push forward different ideas of how we can continue to make our endowment more sustainable.
All right. Well, thank you all so much again. Please be in touch with any questions or thoughts on how we can collaborate and move this work forward. And have a wonderful afternoon.